Welcome to the Western Journal, welcome to WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. I knew I was going to make a mistake. This is my first time opening up. On WJ Live today, I am Michael Austin, a reporter for the Western Journal. I'm joined by Joe Setyen, Deputy Managing Editor of Story, and Deborah Van Kempen, one of our new story editors. We're going to talk about lots of great stuff today. Hopefully there won't be as many flubs as I just had at the beginning there. We're going to talk about Grand Theft Auto, conservatism's response to Black Lives Matter. But first, Deborah's going to talk about Governor Cuomo and the scandal that's been going on in New York.
It's going to be a great episode of WJ Live Jr.
Yeah, yes.
So I just wanted to kind of continue the discussion. We've been talking about Cuomo a lot in the podcast over the past few weeks just because of all the hot water that he's gotten with this scandal with the nursing homes and how his administration severely undercounted the number of deaths that actually happened on his watch. And so we just ran a story today that basically, let me backtrack. Last week, he had a phone call with a New York assemblyman who said that Cuomo threatened to destroy him and things like that. And then now it looks like New York State Democrats have publicly announced a censure against Cuomo, which essentially is a kind of like publicly denouncing him. And so people have been criticizing the governor of claiming that he didn't have enough time to kind of look over the COVID numbers, and all the while he has been writing a book, he's been receiving an Emmy Award, he's been making fun posters, and so it's just the hypocrisy is kind of ridiculous. And so it's interesting that now New York Democrats have announced the censure against him, and so I wanted to kind of talk about his 2022 chances for governor. So he has been in office for a long time already, and it looked like he was probably going to run for governor again. Do we think that he is still going to do that with everything that's been happening lately?
Well, I think this censure definitely means I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
If he doesn't have the support of his own party, it's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, but what you have to remember is this is New York, right?
Right.
And one, it's going to be very hard for any Republican to beat him. Two, it will matter whether the establishment is still behind him, and I think they're going to be. I think that they're going to try to move over and kind of forget about this because he is New York royalty, right? For better or for worse. His father was the governor, Mario Cuomo.
Right.
I believe he's related by marriage to the Kennedys. This guy's as establishment as it gets. Will he win is another question. I don't think so. I think that if he runs, right, the last serious challenger he had was in 2018 when Cynthia Nixon, the actress and kind of socialist, ran as a primary challenger from the left, and she tried to beat him, and she didn't come particularly close, though she got a lot of headlines. And that's gonna be it, right? No Republican is gonna be an establishment Democrat in New York State. And then the last thing you have to remember is that Bill de Blasio, who is the mayor of New York City, has been unpopular for a very long time.
Yeah.
And I believe his reelection was in 2017. He wasn't popular then. Nobody liked him, and he trounced the opposition, Nicole Maliotakis, who's now a Republican congresswoman from New York. It's just very, very hard. New York is so corrupt, I would say, and just so entrenched in establishment, all that kind of stuff, that it's really hard for someone to break through and beat one of those establishment politicians.
But do you think the establishment will get behind him? Because we are seeing, with all the New York Democrats now censoring him.
Who do they have better? Who else is going to run?
Well, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
But... Yeah, I guess if they don't have any other options.
I just think what you have to remember is that memories are short, right? And Democrats may be playing a longer game here. They're saying, okay, look, he's under a lot of fire now. We're going to do it. We're going to play the game. We're going to censure him, whatever. But, a year from now is a long time. And we know how the media likes to cover for Democrats. We know how Democrats themselves like to be hypocritical and move past their scandals. So I just wouldn't be surprised if he's able to get away with this.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I hope he doesn't.
Right, of course. It's interesting that you bring up de Blasio because I know him and Cuomo have kind of been head to head with each other, especially over the events with everything that happened with COVID and how Cuomo was handling the pandemic versus how de Blasio wanted to and things like that. Do you think that there are a certain percentage of people that are going to want to take de Blasio's side over Cuomo's if it comes to that.
No. De Blasio is very unpopular. I don't think I can emphasize enough how much people don't like him. Even like, he got reelected because people, they vote for a guy they don't like. That's just kind of the way it is. But no one likes de Blasio. Even, Democrats don't really like him. Republicans certainly can't stand him.
Right.
He's just he's just not very well liked. I think Cuomo, even though he's, his popularity is fading, is still, I think, a bit
Still
more
well received.
liked than de Blasio, who's just, kind of a cartoon villain of awfulness.
I will say, although, this scandal has certainly been hurting Cuomo, it's been more of the cover-up that's hurt him than the actual, mishandling of nursing
Right.
homes. We've had lots of other Democrats mishandle nursing home, situations as well, sending sick people back in nursing homes. Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan did the exact same
Whitmer?
thing.
Gretchen Witch.
Yeah, Whitmer.
Wasn't sure if that was on purpose or not.
It actually wasn't,
That was good. Good
I think
wordplay.
it worked out pretty well.
It did.
But she's not seeing any consequences for this, and I don't think
Yeah.
he would have, absent of this sort of cover-up scandal.
Right.
So just to speak to more to what Joe was saying, there's a chance this could all fade away when we get 2 years down.
Do I think
Yeah.
he's going to run for president? Like people were
Yeah.
saying, Andrew Cuomo, future presidential contender? No,
You don't
of
think he's
course
gonna
not. No, he first of all, he doesn't have the charisma to do it. He doesn't. He's a kind of a one-trick pony. He's look, I'm a manager and I can do this and I can lead, and it's kind of all shallow, as you can see. And
yeah.
it just kind of faded once you realized, oh, he's just all talk. He's he's a guy who's part of a rich very famous family. Not even to mention Chris Cuomo, who's his brother, the CNN anchor.
Yeah.
And he played the game and he got to the top of New York politics, and I think that's probably as far as he'll go.
So kind of moving away from Cuomo and more towards the members of his administration, do we think that any of them are going to see significant consequences for the role that they played in covering this up?
I don't think so. I could see this as like they find a way to pin it all on one
Which they've
person.
done already, right?
Yeah.
They've sort of already pinned it on this.
Melissa DeRosa?
Yeah. And, that's what they're going to do. They're going to say this was all her fault. And everyone knows it's, everyone knows she's responsible for it, but so is everyone else. But that's
Right.
basically what they say, the scapegoat. Put everything on her and just say, hey, it was all her. We didn't know about anything, but we are taking action now that we know who did all the bad things, and we are totally firing them, and we take this very seriously. No one sees through it because we're smarter than that, but that's what they'll try to do.
Maybe a couple other people get roped into that,
sure.
but for the most part, like I mentioned before, it doesn't seem like they care enough about what he actually did with the nursing homes. So I don't see much more accountability coming.
Yeah. That's
New York has had a string of really bad governors. I mean, that's not surprising. 'cause
Right.
it's-
Right, with how liberal a city it is,
Yeah.
and things like that. And speaking of kind of liberal principles, I know that you wanted to talk to us about sort of a movement that is kind of the anti-liberal BLM.
Anti-Black Lives Matter, yeah. So I had the opportunity to interview the two founders of this new organization earlier this morning. The organization's called Every Black Life Matters. And essentially what it is it's a Christian conservative response to Black Lives Matter. It's an organization that, while Black Lives Matter supports a lot of policies that will actually make things worse for underserved communities, Every Black Life Matters, their organization supports things like capitalism, free markets. They support fathers in the home. They support educational choice. They're pro-life. So, they feel like they support Black lives from the womb to the tomb is how their founders put it. And we're going to play a couple clips of the interview that I did with them earlier this morning. Here's a clip of Kevin McGarry, one of the founders.
Critical distinctions with what we do and what BLM does. Fundamentally, Every Black Life Matters actually is an organization that puts sort of leftist, progressive political activists on the defense. And the reason why is this. Black Lives Matter is a overriding sentiment, but Black lives really can't matter until such time that every single Black life matters. So we take it a level granularly, and we say, look, for us, every single Black life matters from conception to the grave. Every phase of Black life matters to us. Every plight, every barrier in Black life matters to us. BLM as an organization, they're strictly about police brutality, and more importantly, they're strictly about white on Black, white police on Black citizens police brutality. And that's a very, very, very narrow focus of Black life. So we needed an organization that was God-honoring, faith-honoring, moral, and nonviolent. So people who agreed with the sentiment that indeed Black life does matter, we need to begin to address the systemic issues, the systemic plights as barriers in Black life. We can't agree with BLM in that regard. We agree with every Black life matters, and that's why we're here.
And going off on that, Neil Mammon, the other founder of this organization, then spoke about how they're trying to take the momentum that Black Lives Matter has gained. Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter associated groups have received upwards of $10 billion in donations since this whole thing started with the George Floyd incident. So Neil Mammon, in this second clip, he's talking about how they're trying to use that momentum to actually support values that will help these communities.
We decided that we want to use something called Aikido. And if you understand the Japanese martial art, Aikido is where you take the energy of your opponent and you deflect it and you direct it to your purposes. So the idea here is, for instance, what do you say to somebody who's yelling Black Lives Matters at you? You're at a rally or something, there's a bunch of BLM people and they're yelling at you, or maybe you're in a restaurant and they're yelling at you and they're asking you to say Black Lives Matter. And you can't, because BLM is fundamentally a Marxist, anti-God organization. So the way we say that you answer that is you use the Aikido technique. And what we say is you go to them and you say, look, I agree Black Lives Matter, but my question to you is, do you think that every Black life matters? Now, what are they going to say? They can't say no. They have to say, yes, every Black life matters. So then you ask them, well, what about the fact that 70% of young Black kids are born in a house without a father? And we know that fatherhood is necessary, is critical for avoiding drugs and violence and for good educational choices and for growing up healthy. Do those Black lives matter? And of course, they're going to have to say yes. And then you turn to them and you say, well, okay, let me ask you one more question. What about school choice? I mean, did you know that inner city kids are forced to go to schools that have drugs and violence and gangs? And as a result, the literacy rate in the African American community is down to something like 18%. And remember this, before segregation was lifted, before the Civil Rights Act, African American literacy rate was as high as 70%. It's gone down. Well, do those Black lives matter? Do those young Black kids deserve the choice of picking a good school out of their district, out of their drug-infested district? Do those Black lives matter? And of course, they're going to have to say yes. And then you ask the final thing. You say, well, let me ask you this. Did you know that 36% of all African Americans have been killed before they were born? They were killed in the womb. It would be actually 36% more African Americans. If you want to do a genocide and kill all African Americans, that's where you'd start. So do those young, unborn African Americans, do those lives matter?
So I was extremely excited to get to do this interview because I've been waiting for a group that's willing to do the hard work, to go into these communities that don't necessarily want to hear all these ideas, but to go in there and to say, here, this is the gospel of Jesus Christ. These are the, free market sort of tools that you can use to help uplift yourselves. And we really need more voices like that at a time when groups like Black Lives Matter are teaching exactly the opposite, which is inevitably leading to more of the same sorts of oppression and poverty in a lot of these communities of all colors. And so I wanted to get your thoughts just to start things off. Just what do you guys think of this organization?
I mean, I really like the idea, basically, piggybacking off of Black Lives Matter and saying, but we actually care, if they're legitimate. I don't know a whole lot about this organization, but if they are legitimately saying every Black life matters, that's a really good thing. I don't know how you can argue against that, especially with the abortion issue, the capitalism issue, the God issue, all of these things. I would say I hope that they also focus on criminal justice reform, prison
they actually do.
sentencing reform, and they do, and that's what I want to see. what I get a little tired of sometimes is you have Black Lives Matter on one side with their crazy kind of socialism, the official organization with their policies that, you know, are not good, are not going to help. And then on the other side, you have people saying, you know, these things aren't problems at all. You're not recognizing any real problems. We just have to fight Black Lives Matter. And I really think it's very useful and helpful to say, look, both of you are right that there are problems in these things. Let's actually focus on it. Let's put aside the partisan bickering and the fighting and the, you know, taking snipes at each other and actually focus on every Black life mattering. That's really important.
Yeah, and I dug through their site, and they do talk about, you know, criminal justice reform, and you know,
and it's part of the issue,
and you have to go after it from a certain standpoint, a certain understanding. You can't go after it with the belief that all of the systems are inherently evil from the get-go.
Right.
So yeah, what did you think?
Yeah, no, I agree 100% with Joe. I think it's so cool that there's a group that's willing to have a serious discussion about issues like racism and socioeconomic issues and violence and things like that. And then also they bring in the aspect of abortion, and they bring in the problem of fathers not being in the home. And so I think it's very cool that they're willing to bring some more issues to the table that are absolutely contributing to the problem. And, you know, kind of going off of what you were saying, I think too often white conservatives try to dismiss groups that advocate for Black people because we don't want to recognize that there are serious issues that we need to address within the Black community, if not to the degree that Black Lives Matter believes there are in terms
not
of
with
systemic
socialism.
racism.
We're not going to deal with it by abolishing all police departments or socialism or abolishing the nuclear family or stuff like that. But there are ways to deal with it. There are real solutions. We saw that with the First Step Criminal Justice Reform Act. We see that with, you know, a lot of the state level criminal justice things that are happening in conservative states, by the way. We see these real solutions that are meaningful. It's not just rhetoric. It's not just, well, we're going to throw something at you and you're going to lob a pot shot back at us. These are good solutions, and we need more of this. We need people saying every Black life truly matters. Let's actually figure out a way to implement.
Here's what we can do to help.
And that is one more thing that they did note, is that, like, you know, we can do this without having to attack. And I thought that's a great point that you bring up, Joe, because that is something that they said. And but going off on, you know, what you were kind of talking about, Deborah, it does seem like conservatives have been very dismissive of a lot of these problems for a very long time. And in my opinion, I think that's become the case because politically, Republicans have just started to see these different communities as certain voting blocks. And then they look at the Black community and they're like, well, they're going to vote Democrat. And so why would we even go in there? How about we talk to people that we have a better chance of getting? And what happens with that is you have these entire communities that feel like they're not heard, they're not understood, that Republicans and conservatives don't care about them. And
aside from the token, you know, hey, we care about you, but we don't really care, which I think both sides do.
That's fair.
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot more tokenism on the left, but still there's this dismissiveness, it seems. And, you know, both Kevin McGarry and Neil Mammon, we talked about that as well, and they agree that that's been a problem. So why do you think conservatives have kind of treated these communities and the issues specific to them as something that's not necessarily primary concern of theirs?
Well, I don't think it's because they're racist. Just to kick it off.
That's a good.
That's probably a good way to start that, because I think
Yes.
that's the left's answer as well. They don't care about this because they're racist.
Right.
I think that it's a whole host of issues. Right. So you saw over this summer where most Republicans, most conservatives agreed that the death of George Floyd was a horrible, horrible thing, and that something had to be done about it. We saw the death of Ahmaud Arbery, and we said, look, these are awful things, and we maybe have to, you know, reform the way we do prosecuting, reform the way we do policing,
unions.
some of these ways. Police unions especially, that's a huge one. But then we saw this violence happen, and everyone sort of retreated back to their respective corners. So I think every time something like that happens, conservatives tend to just say, nope, all law and order, that's more important than this legitimate issue, right? That's more important than the issues that Black Lives Matter has brought up. And then, on the other hand, Democrats say, we don't care about law and order even a little bit. Defund all the police. We're retreating back to our corner. And so you have these people who had sort of, I feel like they were moving toward compromise, right? With the First Step Act, with some of these state level things, but then violence happens and everyone just goes back to actually, no, we're just going to stick to
Yeah,
our
retreating back to
Yeah.
tribalism.
thing. Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
conservatism is conservatism. Yeah, conservatism
Yeah.
is maybe not always the best at saying here's an issue and maybe we need to do something new to solve it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's easy to dismiss anything that's going to get in the way of the status quo. You know, like it's easy to
Right.
dismiss something that's going to make you really think about the policies that you have in place and think about how can we fix this issue moving forward. And so it's just an easier way of life for a lot of white conservatives to not recognize the issues that are there. And it's, you know, obviously, like I vehemently disagree with BLM because, you know, they're Marxists, they're pro-violence and things like that. But there are every Black Lives Matters organization is doing a great job at recognizing these real issues that we do need to turn our attention toward, and that we need to recognize there are steps that we can take where we don't just have to turn a blind eye to this. We can actually do something that's going to improve these things.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good thing that you said. And I'm going to say something that might not be all that popular, but I'm going to try to build off of what you said, which is that, look, I did not grow up in low-income housing. I did not grow up... I just didn't grow up. I don't have I didn't grow up in the Black community experience, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know
Right.
firsthand what they face. None of us do. And that's not to say, oh, we can't talk about it since we're not Black, since
Right.
we're white.
Since
we
we're the
can't talk.
oppressors,
But
yeah.
it is to say, look, we do have to listen because
Yes.
we
Yeah.
don't have that experience.
Yeah.
We just don't.
Yeah.
And again, that's not to say we're racist. It's not to say, well, we're white, so we're automatically the worst. It's just to say, look, it is important to listen. It's important to listen to people like the interviews you played with, what they're saying. It's important to listen to what everyone is saying and to not say, you know, well, we're just going to ignore your issues
Yeah.
out of hand. And I think sometimes people on the right tend to do that since we can't understand the issues that the Black community faces.
Since we haven't
just
experienced
ignore
it
them.
ourselves. Yeah.
Right.
And what these people are doing is the right way to do it, right? They're saying, look, we're going to actually talk about this stuff. And that's what we have to do. We have to talk about
Yeah.
everything.
It reminds me of a tweet I can't remember who put this out, but somebody asked this prominent conservative speaker, like, well, how do we reach out to the Black community? How can we better communicate with them? And he said, well, for starters, listen and don't immediately say, what about black on black crime?
Exactly.
So
I think that's a good.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
a good
and it's
point.
great what this group is doing too. I was looking at their website a little bit, and you know, they have these fatherhood initiatives because obviously the presence of a father in a home is so impactful. You know, it helps you get higher paying jobs, it helps you have more stable relationships in the future and things like that. And so the things that they're doing in the real world by making sure that fathers have a good connection with the church and by making sure that people are being mentored if they need to and things like that. They have these programs that they have implemented that are really doing some good in the community that aren't focusing on white people as the oppressor.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And you know, while groups like this are actually trying to find real solutions for real problems, you know, we see in Illinois that a lot of Democrats are trying to
Don't get me
find
started on this one.
their solutions are not real at all.
Yeah. So in Illinois, right, there has been a bit of a carjacking problem to the point where in 2020, carjackings were actually up 135% over the last, over 2019. And also more than 200 carjackings took place in January alone. So there's an issue with carjackings, right? And one Democrat solution, which may surprise you, is to ban the game Grand Theft Auto.
No.
So the problem, as people say it, is some of these carjacking suspects are rather young, right? They're in their teens, 15, 16, as young as 13 in a few cases, right? And what one police officer said, one retired police officer said, these guys feel like they're going to get right back out, especially since they are juvenile. So they feel like there's nothing to lose. Let's just steal a car and we'll go back. We'll go to jail for a little bit and then we'll get out. So there's a state representative in Illinois, and he, I believe, represents the Chicago area. And he has proposed a bill. It's called House Bill 3531, and it would ban the sale of video games depicting, and I'm quoting from the bill's summary, psychological harm, including, quote unquote, motor vehicle theft with a driver or passenger present inside the vehicle when the theft begins, i.e. carjackings. So this would ban games like Grand Theft Auto. Now, a lot of people don't think this is the right solution. And I am one of those people because I think that this is in line with sort of the left's go-to solution, right? When there's a problem. You got a problem, let's ban a video game, right? You got an environmental problem, let's ban straws, let's ban plastic bags. You got a problem with gun violence, let's ban so-called assault weapons. The left loves to ban things. And this fits right in with it, right? The guy who introduced the bill is a Democrat as well. And I just can't stand it. I cannot stand it, right? We saw it with Michael Bloomberg, right? He's famous. One of his most famous things, and he was a Republican at the time, but he's a Democrat now, is to ban big gulps because there was an obesity problem in New York City. We see it with socialists who say we should ban billionaires, right? It's ban, 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 ban. In this case, with banning of Grand Theft Auto, which if you haven't played this game, it's not the best game. I wouldn't recommend
the
it
most wholesome
to anyone. It is not wholesome. It's basically you run around and commit crimes, right? You being a fake character in a fake world, fake.
Certainly wouldn't want your kids to be playing.
You would not. But studies have shown that there's really no link between violent video games and actual in real life violence.
Yeah.
But I feel like we keep coming back to let's ban violent video games. The last thing I'm going to say is that banning things we don't like because we see a problem is not just a Democratic issue, unfortunately. Senator Josh Hawley, a couple of years back, introduced a bill that would ban autoplay on YouTube because he saw, social media addiction as a problem, and I do think that's a problem. But it's something we see from politicians: is you got a problem, simple solution, ban it. Deborah, I'll start with you.
Yeah.
Why is it the tendency of all these politicians when they see an issue to just ban something they don't like?
I think, again, it goes back to because it's easier than it is to come up with an actual solution, and we saw this when the prohibition period was happening, just because there was a ban of alcohol, it did not stop people from consuming alcohol. You had speakeasies popping up all over the place. And it's just like human nature that when we're told we can't have something, it makes us want it 10 times more. And so I believe that a ban is definitely not the answer. I am not the biggest fan of the game, as I don't think any of us are. Personally, I think it's kind of gross and violent.
Yeah, it's not a
right.
good game.
Yeah, but it is, as it stands, it's my choice to not play it, just like it should be someone else's choice if they want to play the game. Yeah. And so I really don't think that a ban is going to be helpful in this situation at all.
There's also the issue of, maybe with Grand Theft Auto, not so much, but when you talk about banning things, then in order to get them, you have to go to kind of seedier elements of shady people who are the type of people that get you banned stuff.
Oh, yeah.
That's what you saw with Prohibition back in the 1920s, I believe it was, where organized crime rose up because they were smuggling alcohol. So, Michael, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, finding solutions to these problems like carjackings, it's complicated.
Yeah.
And it's not,
That's the key word.
When politicians talk about what the actual solutions will be, what the actual solutions are, that doesn't really get people riled up because it tends to be, complicated and there's lots of work that goes into it. But if you can just go out and say, hey, we're going to ban this dangerous, violent thing, and that's going to fix all your problems, that's a good way to get all your supporters riled up. That's a good way to show people, oh, yeah, I care about this issue.
Yeah,
and
so we're banning it.
So the political system just incentivizes this kind of behavior from lawmakers.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. But I think it's, and lawmakers always want to get a headline, right? They always want to make the headlines. And you get headlines when you say you're going to ban something. It's ridiculous. As a libertarian, I am of the opinion, and many conservatives don't agree with me, that as long as you're not hurting anyone else, and nothing should be banned. And again, that's not an opinion many conservatives have, which is totally fine. But especially when it comes to things like video games, which I think there's some First Amendment issues there, where what this guy wants to do is ban the sale of Grand Theft Auto. Then are you kind of limiting people's expression? Are you limiting some of that stuff? I just think there's some very, very thorny issues that you don't want to get into. It's just why not give people the freedom to make the choices that are going to work for them? I guess my question for both of you now is, should pro-small government people support any sort of like banning? Not necessarily. So a good example, like you said, Deborah, Grand Theft Auto is not a good game, right? There are many things that are not good that are not banned. Is there room in, I guess, the small government or conservative movement to say, actually, we should ban that?
I personally, I would say no. I think this goes back to the issue of censorship, which of course we've talked so much about in terms of big tech banning people that they don't agree with on their platforms, and even, Democrats wanting to ban guns. I think that if your automatic response to something is to ban it, then that is going to extinguish a lot of constitutional rights that people have. And so I think that if we are wanting to remain consistent, we have to say, no, this should not be banned, as long as people are abiding by the law in terms of they're not harming
They're
others.
not hurting other people.
Yes.
Yeah, it's tricky. I think I'd have to lean more towards what you and Deborah are saying. When it comes to the disagreements between libertarians and conservatives on a lot of this stuff, it always comes down to where we believe how pervasive we believe the externalities to be. Like, so if there's a game out there where you can, say, rape someone or something, and we know that kids have access to games like that, do we want that to be a thing? I don't know where I would fall in that issue specifically, but you got to think about some of the long-term things. And I think in the end, you don't want to ban things, but socially just be aware that some of these, keep your kids away from these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down
Absolutely.
to parents, right?
And I will say, I've played Grand Theft Auto.
As have
I'm not a huge, I'm not a huge hater of it. I think that some of the things you can do in it are despicable.
Of course.
But, just like a lot of other forms of art, I think that taking art to dark places can reveal some good things. So, and I'm not saying that's the case with a lot of the things you can do in Grand Theft Auto, but I do think restrictions on those things restrict art, restrict what we can say. And in the end, what that does, you start in a really great place, but what that does in the end is you restrict truth.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the things that I have the biggest issue with the government of is things that sound well-intentioned, right? We want less violence. We want less carjackings. We just want safety. We want our kids to, not have access to these video games that probably their parents shouldn't let them play, but that's another discussion. And these are well-intentioned, right? But when the government gets into well-intentioned stuff that it has no business doing, that's super, super dangerous because it's easy to get people on your side when you say, look, we just want to help children. We just want to help this disadvantaged group. We just want to help these people. But the question you're not ever looking, or the question that people who propose these sorts of policies are never looking toward is it the government's job to have these good intentions?
Yeah, and again, I think it's kind of born out of laziness. I think that there are many other ways that you can fix this problem, whether it's additional police funding, which of course they're never going to do, or if it's, like improved juvenile programs where these kids who are very young can have, a better education.
Or maybe it's school choice.
Exactly, exactly. There's so many different avenues that you can go toward instead of just ban it.
Yeah, or you end, the prison sort of the pipeline of just, you're going to go to juvie and then you're going to come out, which is what that police officer who I quoted from was saying. You're going to go to juvie, you're going to come out, not going to be in there for long, and then you're probably going to go right back in once you, commit another crime.
And that just kind of loops back to what I was saying about politicians, where if they come out and say, we're going to reform juvie, we're going to have more school choice, that's no headlines, no excitement.
No, it's not exciting, but it works.
Yes, but it works.
Yeah.
It literally, it does work. And I want to maybe end on a good note, right? You see a lot of headlines about bad things, and there's a lot of bad things going on in the world. Some of the good work that gets done, like you were saying, and there is a lot of it happening at the state and at the local level, you just don't hear about.
Yeah.
And there is stuff happening. There are reforms taking place. There is good policing going on, community policing.
Yeah.
There is school choice reform. We have made so much progress just on messaging alone in terms of school choice reform. There's good things happening. You just don't hear about it.
Yeah.
So be encouraged that, not everything's bad.
And on that good note, it looks like we're going to wrap things up here at the Western Journal. WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. So thanks for joining us at WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. You can catch us every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. If you don't want to miss an episode of WJ Live, be sure to sign up for our newsletters at westernjournal.com/newsletters. You'll get them delivered straight to your inbox. You won't miss a thing. To those of you joining us on YouTube, you can also listen to the WJ Live podcast on the go on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you get your podcasts. To our audio listeners, go to youtube.com/WJ Live, click the subscribe button, and hit the bell. Hit the bell.
Ding.
You got a ding
You
there.
didn't do
I haven't
it.
done the ding.
I
in
was
a
really
while.
counting on
I've
him
been phasing it
No.
out.
to ding there. Hit the bell so you'll get notified when new podcasts go live. And lastly, and most importantly, if you want to support real journalism that speaks truth, go to westernjournal.com/join. That would really help us out. You'd really be doing us a huge favor. That's westernjournal.com/join. Again, thanks for joining us today. We'll see you tomorrow.
The Western Journal has rolled out a brand new subscription model designed specifically for readers like you, who want the unvarnished truth that the establishment media won't tell you. Our multi-tiered plans give you exactly what you want and help us fight fake news during this, the most important election of our lives. Become a subscriber to the Western Journal today and unlock exclusive features you won't find anywhere else. It's easy. Just follow the prompts in this video to join us in equipping readers with the truth.